Good morning and welcome. My name is Michelle Agunloye and I am an engagement associate here at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Today we're going to hear from three dynamic panelists to talk about shared services from a local government perspective. Deputy Executive Director here at the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, having joined the agency in this capacity in 2018. At CMAP, she heads up the planning efforts of the agency's Onto 2050 plan, which is, of course, our comprehensive regional plan. Prior to joining CMAP, she spent 20 years working for the second largest city in the state of Illinois, Aurora. In that capacity, she served as the Director of Planning for 13 years. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Pfeiffer.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us this morning for this, what we hope is going to be a very informational and intriguing conversation. Even before COVID, municipalities were getting creative about how to do more with the revenues that they had and how could they collaborate more to be able to better serve their constituencies. And so we're going to talk about some of those examples of things that hopefully everybody can learn from as we try to take on our new challenges with COVID. So first off, what do we mean by shared services? So just to give you a couple examples of projects that CMAP has been involved in with regards to shared services. The first one being the Lower Fox River Partnering Initiative Shared Services Study. And I think we're going to share a link to that project page in your chat. But in 2014, CMAP worked with Oswego, Montgomery, and Yorkville on a study that was approved by all three communities in 2015. And this study looked at ways for these communities to collaborate and be able to find efficiencies in their governance. And the report also includes lots of lessons learned and worksheets so that other communities can undertake the same type of analysis of their services with other communities. More recently, in fact, we're wrapping it up at the end of this year, we've been working with McHenry County on looking at the same type of idea county-wide. And this project included lots of different government entities, so dozens of different municipalities, townships, special districts all participated in that study. And it looked at not only service sharing, but also joint purchasing, collaborative planning, and other aspects of intergovernmental coordination. So keep a lookout for that report to come out before the end of the year, we're hoping. And so there's also going to be a link shared for you in the chat to that project page. And the last example I wanted to bring up, because it's a little different than the other two, which were really more looking at studying the options. This one is one that we were not involved in, but one of our staff planners has seen the success of it firsthand, is the Cal Park Regional 911 Center. So this is an example of communities getting together on the South suburban region and developing a state-of-the-art emergency call center that serves 6 different communities. So it was a way to them to actually enhance the service that they were able to provide to their communities, but also save costs because they could all collaborate together. So there'll also be a link there to that site that talks a little bit more about that initiative. So in general, shared services, it's about 2 things. It's about avoiding having to have specialized services in everything that a community does, and then finding those economies of scale to provide better local services for the residents in our constituencies. So joining us today to talk about this very intriguing topic, we have 3 regional experts and how municipalities can collaborate across those borders and across different sectors in order to better serve their constituents. So first, we have Christina Burns, Assistant Village Administrator for the Village of Oswego. Second, we have Jenny Maltas, Assistant Village Manager for Buffalo Grove and the President of the IT Consortium, she's going to talk about today. And then Joe Wagner, who's the Public Works Director for the Village of Berkeley. So Christina, Jenny, and Joe have presentations on their work to give to all of us, and then we're going to welcome any questions that you may have. Again, please put your questions in the chat box, and we'll be reviewing that as we go along. And then we'll ask our panelists to address those questions at the conclusion of all of their presentations. So they're all going to present first, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So first, we're going to welcome Christina. So Christina Burns is the Assistant Village Administrator for the Village of Oswego. In this position, Ms. Burns oversees human resources, community relations, purchasing, and other projects to support the village's operations. Christina previously worked for the village of Clarendon Hills as assistant to the village manager and the village of Glen Ellen as an intern in both the administration and planning departments. So welcome, Christina.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'd also like to thank CMAP for putting together this panel. As Stephanie stated, while COVID may have made it more apparent, it has not inherently changed the fact that governments have to approach things differently in order to continue to effectively serve our residents. The demands are only increasing, and we cannot simply demand more revenue in return. That's why I like talking about shared services and making it happen. Local governments can we're in a position to take advantage of the fact that we're not competing against one another. We're all working toward the same goal, so we can collaborate in a lot of different ways. Today, I just want to talk briefly about what Oswego has done for shared services, and then walk through what I think is a bit of a roadmap to start or expand your shared service or collaborative initiatives. So Oswego had a history of attempting shared services, but it had a lot of starts and stops. I was fortunate to be a part of the CMAP LTA grant with Oswego, Yorkville, and Montgomery on the Lower Fox River Partnering Initiative. And that was really a conscientious effort to bring people together to talk about ways that we can work together and collaborate. We were able to achieve some immediate successes, really simple things, kind of looking back on it, and we've built that into much bigger projects. So, for example, things that we started early, Oswego had put in a brine system for treating our roads. Chicago, snow, it's all coming. And Montgomery was interested in it, but one, they didn't have space, and two, they didn't really have the expertise. So we have an arrangement now where Montgomery comes and gets their brine mix from us, and then they treat some of our streets on the way out of town. We have a shared equipment IGA. Oswego does not own a Vector truck, but we occasionally have a need for one. So Yorkville has one, and we use that equipment IGA to borrow it. And then we've also had representatives or our fleet staffs work together just to troubleshoot, to build relationships and share their expertise. From that, we moved on to more complex ideas. We actually have 2 shared employees who are employed by the village of Oswego, but effectively contracted out and work for the United City of Yorkville doing the same position with a purchasing manager and a facilities manager. More recently, we're focusing on more Oswego shared services, so joint contracting with the township, possibly shared personnel with the school district, just expanding our realm of shared services. Ultimately, success, though, depends on the different needs, priorities, and partnerships. So what I want to go through is a little bit of what's a roadmap to actually make that happen. The first thing is relationships. I think the relationships are critical. If you want to advance to the next slide. So you have to build the trust in understanding and willingness to be honest. Hey, where's your board at on this issue? What's the priority for you? And one of the themes that I think is inherent to shared services is also a combined willingness to fail. And I'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the presentation. So it starts with conversations. That may be with the elected officials and the managers, but it really has to continue down the organization because your frontline employees are the ones who see the day-to-day things and see those opportunities. So get the buy-in on shared services and get the conversations moving across the organizations that you are looking to partner with. I think you also have to be strategic about your partnership. Keep on the same, back a slide, please. So you have to be strategic about who you're working with. Oswego, Montgomery, and Yorkville, we're all in a position to, we're all growing. So we know that we're going to have to add staff, but we want to do it smartly. We also face the same or similar challenges and problems. One of our big projects right now is our future water source. We're all in the same boat, literally, in figuring that out, so we work together. We're also open, though, to adding more groups to that conversation. So we check in, we found that it's important to be strategic, but open to adding other partners. So we can move to the next slide now. Thank you. So being intentional, identifying those common needs, literally make a list of what's happening, what's coming in the out years. but also try to get those quick wins. This graph is from our Fox River report, and I really like it a lot. It's focusing on that quadrant of low resource intensive but high impact to start with. So like the brine thing, that was a quick win. Focus on there to start with. We also sharing information can sometimes logistically be difficult. With our local shared service initiative, we've actually set up a Teams platform where we have a list of contracts and we have a list of equipment. So if we're looking for something or just interested in what another municipality or unit of government is doing, we have that resource to look at, and we also just can give them a call. Finally, you have to think about today and in the future. So in those conversations, it wasn't just here's what's going on today, but here's what we're thinking about 5 and 10 years down to the future. Municipalities and units of government were in it for the long haul. So that longer time frame means you're looking at, okay, what's an opportunity to align our contract cycle to jointly contract for this service? Or I'm looking at purchasing this piece of equipment in this year. Can we modify that purchase, whether in time frame or type, so that we can share it across the different organizations? So I think that it's important to be really intentional and think broadly. Next up, it's important to get buy-in. So that starts, of course, with elected officials. We have actually incorporated shared services into our strategic plan. So we know we're growing our staff. Let's grow it smartly. Let's focus on shared initiatives. We also need the elected officials to approve IGAs. We have a number of different intergovernmental agreements with different units of government or other partnering units of government. And so the board needs to have that buy-in because we're asking them to take action on it. Next, this was a tip we got pretty early in our shared service discussion, is that your attorneys can be really a barrier in moving forward with shared services. So you need to make it known to them, and from the elected officials' perspective, that this is a priority, and to not get bogged down in the attorney back and forth, like move forward as soon as you can. Frontline employees were also really important, not only because they have the expertise, but you don't want them to come from a place of fear. So we were very open with our employees that we're not doing this to reduce jobs. We know that we're growing, so we just want to be able to slow that growth and not put so much of a burden on our individual staffs. And then next, just build on those successes. Promote what you're doing, promote your partnerships, both inside and outside of the organization. Just be okay bragging. It's really important. And then the next thing that I think is incredibly important is persistence. I like the Dory because I just have that theme in my head. It's to just keep meeting. It literally comes down to just putting the meetings on the calendar to get people together. You have to be conscious about it and say, hey, we're going to get together every so often, whether it's quarterly, bi-monthly, this is our schedule, this is what's going to be on the agenda, and just keep meeting, keep having the conversations. The go down the path thing is a thing I think about a lot, and it goes hand in hand with failure. So when we looked at doing a central garage shared by the 3 municipalities, we put a lot of time exploring where our fleet was at, what the issues were related to that, what was our staffing, what would the cost be. We pulled together a lot of data, had a lot of meetings. We even issued an RFP for a consultant to do additional analysis. But at a certain point, we decided, even though we've invested so much time in it, this is just not a project that is, this is not the right time for this project. So we put it on hold. But just keep exploring it, because you never know where the opportunity may come up. And then again, that permission to fail. We have had situations where we have looked at a shared service arrangement, we've moved forward with it, and ultimately decided this is not working for us, and so we backed out. And I think that's a smart failure, or maybe you're just not getting the same return on investments, but you just need that permission to explore and to innovate. And show your results, quantify your savings, quantify your cost avoidance. With our purchasing manager, that's something that we actually have her do a report on every quarter. How much money have you saved? Whether it's from not having department heads doing purchasing processes, whether it's actual dollars saved, or revenue from looking at selling some of the things that we have. And then finally, and this is something that frustrates me sometimes, is that ultimately someone just has to take the lead, whether it's scheduling those meetings, setting the agenda, getting the data, bugging people constantly about whatever they've committed to. It can feel frustrating where you don't feel like this is really a partnership, but just keep focused on why you're doing what you're doing, and hope that those partnerships build and you get that initial success. So very quickly reviewing some of the things we've explored and where we're at with them. We have the 2 shared positions. We have the equipment IGA that actually now includes, I think 5 municipalities. We've done joint training, both annually required training and more of a full staff development course through NIU. Shared purchasing, we have piggybacking language in all of our contracts that allows our partners to join in on those contracts. And then we're working to align our purchasing cycles. For example, snow plowing with our school districts. We know that in 2 years, we're gonna look at joint bidding that contract. We did explore the shared IT consortium that Jenny will talk about, but ultimately it wasn't fit for Oswego. I've already referenced the central fleet. We've looked at GIS sharing, but we've run into licensing issues. So this is something that's definitely a priority. We're just trying to figure out how to do it effectively. We're planning to hire pre-COVID a shared emergency operations coordinator with the school district. And then even something as simple as central paper purchasing. If we can collaborate with the county, the school district, the library, the township, and have one paper contract, the quantities mean that the village would save quite a bit of money on that. So finally, I'll wrap up with what we have learned. The first thing is that you can't have the goal of just saving money. I think it can be easy for elected officials or leaders to get hung up on, well, they saved more than we did, or this didn't fully realize the savings. But it's really about the bigger picture. It's building those relationships, building the efficiencies, and hopefully having success in the long term. Like I said, someone has to take the lead. Hopefully after today, that's you. And then consider your service levels. That's where you're going to get the wins, where it's something that's really somewhat standardized, where you have vastly different needs. That's not really the right opportunity to explore at this point. Don't get deterred by failures. Don't feel like any effort was wasted. It's all about learning and exploring, and then maintain the relationships. Be a partner to your neighbors, be a partner to those who want to be a partner with you, and continue to look for those partnerships. So that's my presentation today, and I will turn it back over to Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Christina. And I love seeing so much great implementation from the shared services study. I'm glad to see that there's been so much action on the ground. We love to see that it's not just a study, it's not just a plan, that there's actually impact on people's lives. I also really like that you started and ended with the relationships. You know, for so many years, we're just on a develop, grow our communities stance, and communities were really pitted against each other a lot of times by developers. And I think it's great to see that we've now passed that and we're working together to try to move things forward. And so I also recognized former Mayor Wagner in one of your kayak photos there. So, you know, really just building those relationships on more levels than just even at the shared services. So really great to see. So thank you, Christina. So again, if you have questions for Christina, you can post those in the chat box, and we will be bringing those up at the end after all the presenters have had a chance to speak. Our next panelist is Jenny Maltas, who serves as the village manager for Buffalo Grove and president of the IT consortium. Jenny is the deputy village manager. She supervises the police department, the fire department, the public works department, HR, communications, and IT functions. So she's got a lot on her plate there. Ms. Maltas also oversees the 5-year strategic plan and the sale of services to other entities, and works closely with the senior staff of all departments. Jenny previously served as the assistant to the village manager with the village of Deerfield before she joined the village of Buffalo Grove in 2013. So Jenny, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about some of the things that we have done I'm going to take what Christina built upon and get more specific into how we developed the IT consortium itself, in talking about some of the fits and stops and how we were able to move forward with that. So do I have control of the slides yet? Here we go. Okay. So we started the movement towards creating an IT consortium started before I started with the Village of Buffalo Grove in 2013. There were about 12 communities that worked together and signed a contract with a provider whose goal was to evaluate all of our IT infrastructure in each community and benchmark our infrastructure, our service provisions against what is industry standard in IT. We were specifically looking at IT because this is one of the areas that, you know, local governments aren't necessarily good at. We know a lot more about policing and you know, responding to emergencies, permitting, all of that, but IT is really something that, even having served as the president of the consortium since the beginning of the of this endeavor and overseeing the IT director, you know, I still have a dangerous knowledge of IT and I don't know all of the ins and outs of it. So, you know, this was an area that was we were specifically looking at because we have an attitude in Buffalo Grove where we want to look at outsourcing things that local governments just aren't really good at. So we want the professionals helping us. So that was the goal of the initial study. So we got the initial study back and we had a report that showed all 12 communities, how they benchmarked against each other and how they benchmarked against industry standards. So we were able to take a look at that, and there were varying levels of success in each community, and I won't call out any, but ours was not very good. I can speak to us. So the next step in that process is we asked this same service provider, we used Excipio, and we used them on purpose because they do not provide IT services to communities. So they will, if you want to outsource your IT department, they will not provide that service. So we purposely used someone that couldn't compete if we were later to go out to an RFP for services, because we didn't want them to have any kind of advantage over any other service provider. So that was done on purpose. So after that, we asked them to take the data that they had, look at what was going on across the country, and with their expertise, provide us with a path forward and how we could potentially work together and what are the things that we can do to have a better IT system, have better results, have a more secure system, and potentially ultimately save money on what we were doing. And as Christina mentioned, saving money wasn't the only goal. And this has been especially true in the last, I don't know how much everyone has been following in the IT world, but many local governments are being hacked where their systems go down and they're asked to pay money to get their systems back up. So if they're not able to restore their backups, they have big issues on their hands, and it's really expensive to try to get that back. So implementing security measures was also important, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So ultimately we got the report back, and what they suggested, and there are actually entire states that are doing this, to create a consortium where you contract out to the same provider, and long-term, as you go through the process, you start standardizing on the same platforms. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So at the time, we had 12 communities with us, and there were a certain number of communities that wanted to go and a certain number of communities that were not willing to go. And so we decided, a group of 5 of us decided to jump off the cliff and take the risk, as Christina talked about. So the original 5 communities were Buffalo Grove, Glenview, Lake Bluff, Lincolnshire, and Kenilworth. We later brought on Oswego and Yorkville. As Christina said, it was, you know, this particular consortium was not the right fit for them. Yorkville feels that it is, so they had stayed in, which Christina and I have talked a lot about that. And so a lot of this has to do with relationship and trust. So we were going to jump over the ledge and go into this. A lot of the previous consortiums and joint ventures that we are a part of, such as health insurance cooperatives, the liability insurance cooperatives, items like that are a lot easier to enter into than outsourcing an entire department that affects everything that you do as a municipality. So, we were taking a pretty big risk, but we all decided to jump off that cliff together. So it's been definitely an experience, and we're all definitely a lot closer because of it. So what we did is we had an immediate need in one of the communities because their IT outsourcing, their agreement with their provider was coming up. So we decided at the outset to go out for RFP together as the 5 communities and evaluate the responses that we got back. We ultimately ended up with a company called InterDev that they work with private companies, but they do most of their work with local governments. So we felt more comfortable with them because when we met with them, they knew what we were talking about when we were talking about CAD or some of the more intricate things that we do as a local government. So we ended up choosing them, and each community had their own agreement with InterDev. The long-term goal was to get to a master contract that the consortium approved, which we did get to just this year, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So we all standardized to the same provider, and over a period of 6 months, we all hopped on to our contracts and we all were using the same provider. So the advantage to having that is that if something breaks bad in Glenview, they're able to pull resources from the other communities and focus on trying to get that up. And so we've always focused on, if you need a resource, get the resource. It doesn't matter if Buffalo Grove's allocated a certain number of employees. We wanted to get away from an entire FTE model. We wanted to be just, respond to our tickets, respond to our issues within a certain period of time. And we don't care how you do it, how many staff members you have, if you do it remotely, as long as the problem is fixed and addressed, that's what our priority is. So we had we had some bumps along the way. So while we all entered into these contracts, and I can speak specifically to Buffalo Grove, of the 5 communities, we were the only ones who had in-house IT services. So we actually laid off 3 full-time employees and terminated a contract with another employee in order to do this. So that was a lot harder, and I can speak privately to anyone who wants to talk about that because that's its own webinar in itself. So we then started working towards putting together our IGA and our bylaws. And so what we did is we created a working group and we worked through that, and we used an attorney from one community so that all 5 of the community's attorneys didn't need to review the same agreement and give input in it, reduce the expenses associated with that. So we put together the IGA and the bylaws. We got everything together and our boards approved them. And we were then able to go to the state, and we were a real entity with a tax exempt. It was a big nerdy day for me when I got that in the mail. So we went through that process together so that we could agree on what all of our mutual goals were and how we wanted to operate together. And since we did that together, there was little dispute in terms of how we were operating, which was a very good thing. So the next thing that became a problem was our service level agreements. So in Buffalo Grove, we were extremely happy with the services that we were provided. All of our employees were extremely happy. Some of the other communities were like, what's going on? We're not getting the services we thought we were going to get. And we had a lot of debates at the table about what was going on. So we again engaged Excipio, and we asked, and they did a survey of all of our communities, and we filled it out, and we said, you know, they gave us specific examples. So, you know, if X system goes down, what is your expectation in terms of communication from the IT division to tell you that it's down, and what is your expectation for it to be fixed? And, you know, how many days, hours, you know, whatever the case may be. And they gave a ton of different examples. So they took all of that information and put it on a report, and we had a meeting, and they put it on the big board, and it was all over the place, from expectations to having things fixed within an hour to another community saying it was okay for it to be fixed in 2 weeks. So that was actually what our problem was. And by seeing that on the big screen, we all kind of just started laughing, because we were just not, we didn't have a set, you know, we weren't tracking anything. So we didn't know, you know, what the difference in service levels were. So our agreements with the service provider were best effort agreements, and we wanted to transition to a service level agreement. So they had to respond within a certain period of time to certain levels of severity. So we engaged Excipio to go through that with us using industry best practices, and we worked with our service provider to establish those in terms of what's reasonable, what we want to see, and what industry best practices are. So we then came up with this, which is what we are operating on right now. And the service provider provides us a monthly report that provides us whether or not they met all of these standards as consortium wide, and then there's an individual report for each community. What they are, in our new agreement, there are penalties associated with not meeting the severity 1 and 2 items, since those are critical and high. And that's, you know, a critical item is, you know, the police department can't respond to calls. You know, things like that are going to be your high severity issues. You know, your low severity issues are going to be things like, well, I have something broken on my computer, but I have a workaround on it, so that's not that big of a deal. So that's kind of how it goes from 1 to 4 in that area. So our service provider did, even though in our contracts we did not have these SLAs in them, they agreed to abide by them. And then, so the conversation in the consortium wide with the consortium board changed from, you know, some arguments about who was getting what service. That all went away because we had a monthly report showing exactly what service everyone was getting. The next issue that popped up was, okay, so these are all for our day-to-day tickets, but what about our projects? So if we're implementing a new software, if we're implementing a new ERP, that doesn't really fall within the SLAs, because that's not a break-fix ticket issue. So we had, in our projects, we're really lagging. So Excipio did some additional research with us and worked with the provider, and we found that we only had capacity based on the tickets and what was going on in our communities, 10% of a tech's time to work on projects, which is why, so they couldn't give attention to the projects that we had, because they were working on the day-to-day tickets and kept getting distracted. So which is why we moved to a different model, which I'll talk about in a little bit. One of the benefits that we have associated with being in the IT consortium is we do have 24/7 support. So while they do have techs that are in the Chicagoland, I mean, they established a Chicagoland presence due to the consortium, and they do provide support to other communities that are outside of the consortium. They have a 24/7, excuse me, they have a 24/7 center in Georgia that is always looking at tickets, responding to tickets, and will call and wake someone up in the middle of the night in Chicago if we need that. So that infrastructure that they had in place already was just a benefit that came as a part of having a contract with a larger vendor. So The other thing that we're trying to do now that we've gotten to an agreement about what our service level expectations are is we need to standardize everything that we're doing, because that makes it easier for the techs to respond to our tickets. So one of the first things that we standardized was just our computers. So we put together a list. We ended up standardizing on Dell. And so we have a list, a spreadsheet of what the computers are that we're purchasing. And so we'll purchase generally about twice a year, and the purchasing manager in Buffalo Grove manages that for us. And so we just send the spreadsheet out to the communities. And so, you know, you have your higher level, you have your laptops, and you have your desktops that are doing higher level work. And then you have, you know, some lower end desktops that are maybe just, you need to run one program, but it has to run that one program because it's a requirement in the police department in terms of security and a variety of things like that. So we have that spreadsheet, we send it out, everyone puts their quantities in, and we bid that out, and we go to the lowest bidder, and we've been able to, we're saving about 5% just based on our quantities, because we're all purchasing together at the same time. The next step was to standardize not only the physical products, but also our software systems. So we put together with our provider a 3-year strategic plan where we were moving towards some of the same programs and licensing for email archiver, for example. So we're all on the same one right now. So that's where we were looking towards savings, and this is where the long-term play is. Now, while we as Buffalo Grove, since we had not already outsourced our IT department, we are saving about $240,000 a year on staffing alone. The other communities that had already outsourced their IT are not seeing that type of savings, because at the end of the day, the IT market is the IT market, and it's a very tight market in Chicago. So the way that we get to savings is really the long-term play of joining together and purchasing licenses as the consortium versus individual municipalities. So I have a couple examples that we have done here on this slide. And so we did a joint contract on intrusion testing. So on an annual basis, and actually we're not doing it annually anymore due to the success of the project, but you know, we pay someone to hack into our system and see what issues that we have and where we need to fix them. So what we do is we ask our provider to show us what it would cost us to do it on our own versus what it would cost us to do it together. And so that's where you see the savings. So in some cases, we make decisions that the IT consortium is going to purchase the product because we do get savings on it. In other cases, there really is no savings associated with it. A good example, we're all moving to Office 365 over different periods of time, but because Microsoft basically has complete control of that area, there is no savings associated with all of us purchasing that together. So we're all purchasing our own contract, and we're all going off of the state's contract basically for that. So anything that, you know, there isn't savings to do with licensing, we buy them on our own, buy the licensing on our own. However, we do achieve savings if we're all implementing to a different product on the implementation side, because they're starting to have the same project managers. For example, Glenview and then is going first, and then Buffalo Grove goes next to implement 365. And they're having the same project managers and staff people that are doing that, so they know the process, so they don't have to train someone up to do something like that. So we save efficiencies in hours and what we're paying on that end. Some other easy, like Christina talked about, easy wins. Kenilworth and Lake Bluff did not have off-site backup on their systems when they joined the consortium. So since they're a decent miles apart from each other, they put their backups at each other's sites, and were able to then achieve backup and through the consortium, they're not charging, either community is not charging for that space or anything like that. They're just doing it because we're in the consortium and we're working together. Before we did the joint email archiving that you see down here, we had capacity in our system. So we said, okay, Lincolnshire, they didn't have email archiving that they wanted. So we said, okay, we have capacity. It's going to cost us about this much a year for you to do it. So instead of them purchasing their own system, they've archived back to us. So there are some of those easy things that you can do just because we're all talking and we know what's going on. Another thing in terms of security I'll talk about is when we started as the consortium, Buffalo Grove was the only community that had application monitoring. Hold on, go back. I'm a little ahead of myself. So we decided as a consortium to purchase an application monitoring system. And as you can see, these are the prices if we all purchase them on our own. And these are the prices that we received by doing it through the consortium. So a community like Kenilworth that's a little bit smaller might not have been able to afford doing things like this if they did not get the pricing that was associated with being a part of a larger group. So we've been putting in a lot of security measures that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to afford on our own, but can afford together, which has become increasingly important. And actually, I will go to the next slide now because what we're looking at is dual multi-factor authentication in front of our VPN sites. And this is especially important now as since the pandemic started, we have way more people working from home, much more of that set up. So that is our our priorities have moved around a little bit. And that is what we're currently working on now. So as a part of our, what I talked about before, we now have a master contract that the consortium entered into with our provider. And we pay a monthly amount for your base services. So those are your break fix, your tickets and things like that. And any projects that you want to do, we have a different scope of work and project plan that the provider provides to us with pricing, and they have pricing in their contract for hourly rates. And so they provide us a project scope of work, when everything's going to be done, when it starts, what the pricing is, and then there are penalties associated with it if they don't meet that. The other option we do have is if we don't want to use InterDev for a specific project, we can we can go out for RFP on that project and use a different provider, which we had done recently because we're doing a large CAD implementation, which we are using a different company for. So that's kind of how we've changed our contract. So each community can decide how many projects they want to do and how quickly they want to get them done based on the funding that they have. And then InterDev can staff up and get the right resources in place to do that, which doesn't take away from the day-to-day operations, which is what we were having an issue with before. And so I'll just say at the end that, as Christina said, you have to take risks. This has been a big risk for us and a big learning curve for us. We've had a lot of fits and starts, and you just got to give yourself room to innovate. For any elected officials, you need to give your managers and below the room to innovate and room to fail, because innovation doesn't always come easy. For managers, give your staff that ability to go out and kind of go to the edge and see what you can achieve, because you can only achieve some of these larger projects if you do take the risk. And that concludes my presentation. I'll get it back over to Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I think those are words that we should all keep in mind as we face the challenges ahead. Keep calm and innovate on, right? So I think Jenny gave us a lot of great information there. I know a lot of the communities listening in want to know how they can have these types of conversations with their IT departments. and maybe get more involved in this IT consortium. So we're going to give you Jenny's email address as well as follow up with some additional information for you on this consortium so you can find out more. I also think this is a really good example of, as Christina said, sometimes the legal issues can be some of the biggest hurdles. So even for other services, this can be a really good model of how communities can get together and form a legal entity to take on some of these different services that they want to be able to provide. So with that, I know we're getting close to time, so I'm going to turn it right over to Joe. So Joe Wagner is the superintendent of public works for the Village of Berkeley, where he manages all public works operations. Mr. Wagner joined the Public Works Department in 2004 as a laborer, and he has since held various positions within the village as a content producer for the village's newsletter and executive assistant. Joe was a former English and high school coach, combined 20 years before joining the public sector. So we can't wait to hear from Joe. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I appreciate everybody taking the time today to tune into something like this, because from the perspective of the Village of Berkeley, we are providing a window into a smaller perspective. In a lot of ways, we reside within a postage stamp community, covering only a 1.4 square mile plot of land. We have approximately 1,500 residents who rely on a public works department of 5 laborers pre-COVID, a part-time fire department that is staffed by full-time and fully trained firemen, but those firemen are actually coming to our departments on their time off, and then a combination of full-time and part-time police officers. And I think that it's very important to discuss the fact that while we are a smaller community, our 1,500 residents don't really have expectations that are very different from 50,000 or 500,000 others. Where we provide these services, we are not necessarily looking for places where we could save money. We're looking for places where we could actually provide the services that are competitive with those municipalities that are near us. We are bordered by the villages of Elmhurst, Hillside, and Bellwood, with the Union Pacific Rail Yard to our north. Landlocked by those restraints, there's not much that we can't do, but much of it is based on how can we do it. And that's where it gives us the opportunity to give you maybe an insight into a smaller perspective. From my own public works department, when I took over the department 4 years ago, the very immediate need was going to be to hire someone to take care of our water operator requirement. Entering into the position, I was never in a position where I needed to have a certified license, and we were in a place where we had to find that person. Because we already had a very well established relationship with the Village of Hillside, we were able to work out an agreement with the Village of Hillside to utilize their assistant public works superintendent, who's also their water operator. That created an opportunity and a vast majority of positives that came out of that partnership. Because of that hiring, what we now have is we have a constant communication with our neighbor in the Village of Hillside, but also we receive our water from the Hillside Berkeley Water Commission. And by placing myself along with our Hillside operator in constant contact with our provider of water, we have a regular, we'll call it a text ring that provides insight into what's happening within the system. Coming into this particular meeting, I became aware of the fact that we had a service interruption. It's still unclear if that's a water main break or a water service leak, but I send out that information to both Hillside and the Hillside Berkeley Water Commission so that immediately they can take a look and see how that's having an impact on their system as well. That also works in both directions, because at that point when I sent that information out, not only did the Hillside Berkeley Water Commission confirm that the Village of Hillside was actually taking care of 2 water main breaks at the same time, but a constant flow of information immediately became present. That helps us to know why and how things are operating within the system, and to explain maybe those types of increases within the pumping requirements. During the course of that relationship with the Village of Hillside, though, in that particular sense, we began to increase our communication and extend it outside of just the water operations. We now have a pretty regular sharing of materials and equipment and staff where it comes to maybe positions of emergency, but also more importantly, positions of necessity. With enough advance notice, there's opportunities where, and I think it was previously mentioned, a Vactor is not working with one side of the relationship, and we can send over our Vactor or vice versa along with an operator to make sure that we can help to assist and take care of the situation that's happening right now. Because of the relative size of our department, because we are small, pre-COVID we had 5 full-time members. I now carry only 4 staff members. COVID has made it very difficult for training to occur, as I'm sure it has happened with many people. So when there are training opportunities outside of the pandemic, we combine our small department with Hillside's just slightly larger department to maybe have 10 people over in one place so that we can maximize training opportunities. It helps in order to bring people together and make that training opportunity worthwhile for the person who's actually presenting. And when we can combine those departments, we can make sure that both entities are well informed. From the Public Works perspective, again, even though we are small, we are not as small as some of our local entities. Our Berkeley Park District and our Berkeley Public Library don't employ anyone that can specifically handle maintenance issues. So for years, what we've actually done is we've taken care of snow plowing operations for both. And on an as-needed basis, maybe the public library will call on us to help them to move furniture or to assemble things, to receive deliveries that they are not capable of receiving on their own. And the same goes for the Berkeley Park District. It's essentially run just by a director on its own. Everything else that they do is contracted out. So with opportunities to work with our local entities, we can actually keep their costs down as well. Within our police department, more recently, because of one of the key terms that I think we'll actually discuss a little bit later, due to the consolidation of the dispatching services, we found ourselves in a position where the necessity to keep overnight staff to observe and monitor any detainees within our cell areas, we found that was going to become an issue that was prohibitive. When you had overnight 24/7 dispatching, you could actually count on one of those individuals to watch the monitors and make sure that everyone was staying safe. As soon as we stepped away from that, we had the difficulty of trying to find a monitoring possibility. We entered into discussions to find out if we could find someone who was retired, who maybe wanted to sit on a monitor overnight. We took a look at part-time opportunities, and we eventually opened up a conversation with the Village of Hillside, whose accommodations for detaining prisoners were much larger than ours and already monitored by a 24/7 in-house staff. Our more recently minted, I guess we can say, police chief came up with the idea of reaching out to them to try and see if there was a possibility of working out an arrangement where we can drop off those prisoners overnight to be then processed maybe in the morning to wherever they need to go next. For those infrequent opportunities, the two villages worked out a very nominal fee, and I have to admit that I don't feel personally capable of telling you what that is. It's not my policy, but I can certainly get you that information. But over a year now, we've been working with the Hillside Police Department to work this out. And what that has done is that has allowed the Village of Berkeley to maybe make sure that they have enough money to get full staffing across all 3 shifts and weekends. And where you can stop to consider the fact that policing right now is a very important topic within all of our communities, a full staff for the entire community during the course of any day and any hour is very important. Being able to shift our monitoring of prisoners over to the Village of Hillside really helps to make sure that we can provide that level of service that our residents are expecting. Moving on to our fire department, however, what we'll find is that from almost the beginning of the village's existence, because of our size, we've had to find a way to provide the type of protection, fire protection, that everyone would expect, but also find a way to do that without actually having full-time firemen. Since the early 1970s, the Village of Berkeley has actually run a part-time fire department that was primarily staffed by full-time firemen who, on their days off, were coming into the Village of Berkeley. At the very onset of that program, we had those individuals staffing our department during the daytime, and that was considered the daytime crew. And then in the evening, usually I believe it was after 5 o'clock, the fire department itself was not staffed, and we had a paid on-call service. Coming into the early 2000s, we shifted our focus to try to make sure that we had 24-hour coverage to include our firemen and our paramedics. And then now at this time, what we have is we have a highly trained staff from many of the Chicagoland departments, and a rotation of 32 skilled firemen that will come in and out of the Village of Berkeley on a very tight schedule. We're also contracted with a couple of paramedic units as well. What this has done is it's allowed us to provide that level of service that our residents would come to expect, and the safety that comes with that service, but without the need to go through and fight through union negotiations and benefit discussions and the overhead cost of pensions. It's important to say that doesn't mean that we're handling fires with a bucket of water. We do still have a fully functional fire department with all of the apparatus that any other might have. It's just that we are actually taking the advantage of having those highly trained individuals coming from other departments, bringing their training and then bringing their perspective as well, which allows us to provide a little bit better service to the individuals within the community. More recently, we've actually partnered with CMAP directly and again tapped on the shoulder of the Village of Hillside to pull some attention towards one of our high traffic areas in terms of Taft Avenue and Electric Avenue. And where there may be some of you who are quietly singing along to the song of Electric Avenue, that's where our village actually resides. That's where our village hall is, and that's also where we have a unique sharing of a portion of the prairie path. Bringing CMAP to the table and partnering with both the Village of Berkeley, the Village of Hillside, and our Berkeley Park District has allowed us the opportunity to pull together some resources to see if what we can do is maybe develop this space to hopefully highlight the prairie path access that we have, but also to maybe better increase some of the retail environments that are along that space. Focusing specifically on the prairie path itself, not only do we have pedestrian traffic, foot traffic, but we've also got bike traffic that comes to and through the prairie path, and it passes through our community as well as the Village of Hillside. One of the things I think that we've always wanted to do is try to see if we can capture some of that traffic, maybe either bring them to activities that we have in the park from the Park District perspective, or bring them to some of the retail that we have right in that space. But because we share that almost 50-50 split straight down the road with the Village of Hillside, it would be unfortunate for us to make a development plan that didn't take into consideration the fact that they're right there on the other side. There's nothing quite as maybe unappealing as seeing one side of town look very bad and another side of town look very good. I think in that respect, when you go and you see that maybe one side has got lots of leaves all over the ground, the other side thinks that they're being taken care of better, but they don't realize that that effort is still coming to them. When you take a look at a joint development like this, we have the opportunity to put a whole lot of attention into one space and draw retail and hopefully purchasing to an area to benefit both communities at the same time. So by partnering with the Village of Hillside on this, we were able to pull CMAP in, and I believe at this point we're about halfway into our study with an eye on further presentations coming in the new year. Of course, as we take a look ahead, though, COVID is on everybody's mind. As a matter of fact, as a couple of folks have walked in through our main entrance here this morning, we have what I can only consider a constant reminder of the presence of COVID-19, where a mounted thermometer takes the temperature of people as they're coming and going. Within the Village of Berkeley, this is probably one of the more stressful times that you can ever consider, even aside from any natural disasters that might blow through. Despite the fact that we have a currently healthy fund balance, where we don't have to be in a place where we're considering laying anybody off, we can't really say for sure that we have enough money for a prolonged pandemic, for something that's going to continue to go forward. As I mentioned before, within my own department of 5, we did have someone who retired. And because of the fact that we currently have COVID-19, we are on a hiring freeze across all departments. And the reason why that becomes an important thing to mention is the fact that you are constantly looking out for the health and safety of the people who are working for you on a daily basis. But in any one particular moment where someone gets sick, whether it be by COVID-19 or for some other instance, or unfortunately due to injury, that puts an extra additional stress on the people who are still here and still doing the work. There are plenty of times where I have to actually go out into the field in order to take care of things because of a loss of a body, or potentially someone who actually has time off due to them, but doesn't feel that they should be taking that time off because of the impact to the rest of the departments. I think looking ahead, every community is going to be struggling a little bit in that regard. It has become very difficult for not only the people who obviously have gotten sick, but for those people who are not sick and have to kind of pick up the slack. And then more importantly, because we had spoken about our public services and our safety services, I think it's something that we have to acknowledge, where we have a combination right now of a national spotlight on law enforcement that makes it very difficult to find those people who might want to become police officers in any size community, but then also have to deal with the fact that there are people who have to consider whether or not they want to enter into another environment different from where they are currently working, which has made things very difficult to fill positions where it comes to hiring. I think going forward, what's going to happen is that we will be challenged with those people who have personally been laid off from other municipalities, but then also how is it that we're going to fill those positions on our own, which is going to shift us all the way back around to the question again of shared services. So the whole intent of, I think, today is to provide people with an insight into the fact that this is not something that's uncommon. It shouldn't be considered scary. And I think that if you can set aside the immediate concern for just saving money and focus instead on the provision of those services for those people that expect them, it's a great place to start. So I thank you guys for listening in, and look forward to any questions that we can answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. And thanks for highlighting for us again, really for us to keep in mind that at the end of the day, it's all about providing services to the residents, what they expect, and making sure that they have the quality of life that they deserve living in our communities. And that's the reason why we're doing all this. So I know we're at time, but those attendees that can stay with us, I wanted to just pose one question to the panel from the audience, which really gets to that point of the residents. And the question really is around how do you get residents involved How do you get them on board with sharing services, agreements? How do you, sort of let them know what some of those cost savings are, and how much are the residents really involved in highlighting which services that you guys should be looking at first? So maybe we'll go around, maybe start in the order we presented. So Christina, do you want to have anything to add to that question?
I mean, honestly, I don't think our residents have been involved. It's easiest to share services when there's not an apparent impact and it's more of an operational side issue. I think if we were to go down the path of a shared service where it's more public, we are in a position to point back to, here's the things that we have done in the past and here's how they have been successful. So that would certainly be our strategy.
The residents really haven't been too involved in what we've been doing. Our board was actually, the issue has been more of our elected officials. And if you're starting off on sharing services or contracting out even to share services with other communities, it's important to start with services that are not as visible to residents, because your board is much more willing to take a risk on something like that. With the IT consortium stuff, we had to lay off employees, but those aren't there's, as bad as it sounds, they weren't public safety employees. So, the board, they get really, and the community gets really, frustrated if you're talking about not filling a firefighter position or doing something different with those services. So I think that, we actually did and this isn't shared services related, but we did outsource all of the maintenance at our golf course. And we were able to save $5 million over a 5-year period. And the golfers on the course actually said that the gameplay and the course was actually better maintained in that system. So, you just kind of have to show, like Christina said, if you did have some issues with residents, you would show your wins and how they worked. And that's really, a communication strategy that you would have to go to. But, if you're starting a little bit from scratch, it's best to try to start with some easy wins that maybe aren't as visible to the public. And I think that would give the board comfort, and then you can move forward with things that are a little bit more visible.
And maybe just to add, I think that each community is going to be a little bit different, but education is where it starts. I think that if we just use the term shared services and we place that out in front of a resident, the very first thing that they're going to ask is how come you can't do this for us? Why is it that you need assistance? And then there's a connotation that probably goes with that, where they think that may eventually lead to expense rather than savings. And in some cases it might. I mean, it's very important, I think, to make sure that you're not making decisions in a vacuum, and also educating and taking the time to get that information out there to the right people. And sometimes it may be as easy as a Facebook post. Other times it might be an open house. But at least for the Village of Berkeley, where decisions like these have been made in the past, it's been very critical to make sure that we're offering an opportunity for residents to ask questions, have them answered in their language in a way that they can understand, and make sure that they are assured that this doesn't mean that there's something bad that's on the horizon. We're not closing the doors. The village doesn't go away tomorrow because we're running out of money. These are the types of concerns that people have, and sometimes whether or not they seem rational, it takes a measure of explanation, and it's something that we have to be prepared to do.
One thing I'll expand on a little bit is you were talking. During COVID, we started a campaign called BG Delivers that has its own logo and everything. And what we've been doing is through our e-news, our website, through our newsletter, is having entire sections dedicated to BG Delivers. And one of the things that we did was I wrote a couple articles about how we as the Village of Buffalo Grove were working with all of the other governmental entities that serve Buffalo Grove to work together to provide services during COVID-19 and all of the examples associated with that. So as much as you can market what you're doing to the community so that they already see it and they get used to it, is going to make it a lot easier. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback because there is this obvious mistrust of government that starts from the federal level and trickles down to us. And I think that partnering together and showing savings and additional services, I think is something residents do want to see.
Great. So that's really great advice. Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists for all the information that you brought to us today. There's a lot more, I think, to discuss. So I see another CMAP Talks seminar in our future to maybe dive in a little bit more. You guys brought up a lot of new topics that we can certainly explore. I want to thank the attendees for attending as well. Any questions? I know we didn't get to some of the questions in the chat box, but we will get back to all the attendees with answers from the panelists for the questions that you posed. And thank you all very much. And hopefully we will see you again for another CMAP Talks. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.